Hello. All right, so just verifying. Am I heard? Yeah, okay, I just got to keep this kind of close, not on right. All right, so hello everybody, I'm Tab Atkins. I work for Google. I am a member of the CSS working group and a number of other spec working groups. And I've been doing specs for 6 or 7 years now. It appears to be my passion. There's a number of links up there and whatnot. If you want to follow the slides, there's a couple of useful links in them that you can click on. I don't have the URLs visible, so you want to click on them. That's the talk today. Or you just go to /talks and choose the one with the right date. So I'm going to, once I get this, talk today about the future of CSS. This is a smaller screen, so there's even more here than you even know. Or at least a little bit of it. A lot of specs that I've worked on that I have been excited about for the last several years, and I have a lot of stuff and not a lot of time, so we'll be going through pretty quickly here. This is not meant to be a let's learn about lots of stuff deep dive. It's just a here's a bunch of cool stuff. I will mention one sentence about each of them, more or less, and you can learn more about them later, just to get you excited, to let you know the landscape of the stuff. I swear I can get this working. Oh, that's better. Okay, cool. So we're going to start with image values. This was actually my very first spec when I started working on CSS. It was the thing that got me into the working group. I was like, WebKit's original gradient function is shit. I can make a better grammar for it. And I did, and they were like, why don't you just write the spec? You've basically already done so. So some of the new things are showing up here. Exciting one is the image function, a souped up URL. 3 examples of functionality right here that it lets you do. Just small bits that are worthwhile. The first one shows off fallback to a color. If you have, say you have a light website background, dark buttons with white text on them. You're using a dark background image so that the white text offsets nicely. But if that image 404s, you're screwed. White text onto a white background because there's nothing to contrast against anymore. You can use the image function once it's implemented to say, if this image doesn't load, just go ahead and make a color for me. It's good enough. So instead of a dark background image that you would like, you'll have a black square, better than nothing. The second one is just straight up color images, easy way to generate. If you ever needed solid color images, right now you can do so with linear gradient. You just repeat your color twice and it kind of generates it, but that's a kind of a weird hack. Image lets you go more directly. You just leave off the URL and the color that's left there will generate a solid color image for you. In this particular case, I am blue tinting a background by putting a partially transparent blue image on top of another background image. The third one, if you've heard about, everybody's used image spriting at some point. This shows off a syntax for media fragments that lets you do image spriting directly. This, rather than having to do weird hacks with background position and background size, you can literally say, load up this sprite sheet, foo.png, and give me the rectangle with these coordinates. That's the image I want. Gives you the correct size, lets it repeat, etc. The problem is, though, that if a browser doesn't support media fragments, it'll just show you the whole sprite sheet and it'll mess everything up. Image requires the browser to understand the syntax of the hash, or else it will just fail. So you can use this kind of thing safely. Older browsers will just ignore it, ones that don't understand the fragment syntax. If we introduce new fragment syntaxes or new types of things to images in the future, same thing. It'll let you do fallback at the syntax level very nicely. Next up is the image set function. This has been around for a while. It was introduced by WebKit in the before Chrome forked from the code base. If you're familiar with the picture element and the image source set attribute that I've also worked on a bit, this does similar functionality there. Right now it does just the basic stuff. You give a URL, you give a density, it chooses which one it wants to load based on the user's screen and then potentially other things, their connection speed, etc. In time, it will be upgraded to match picture fully in functionality, similar functionality to what sizes and the W descriptor does. You can already use media queries just naturally in CSS to get the same functionality of art direction that picture allows, etc. The crossfade function lets you smoothly fade between 2 images. This currently already works in WebKit and Blink, Safari and Opera and Chrome. Slightly older syntax than what's presented here and in the spec, but we'll change to it whenever we unprefix. Fun thing is this is used already by the animations, CSS animations, to do animation between images. What I'm showing right here is literally just an animation going between 4 background images, and it uses Crossfade to automatically give you the transition behavior. Let's not install. All right, cool. Image rendering controls how an image scales. Here we go. The original image is there. I blow it up by 2 times in each dimension. The original, the normal behavior using bilinear scaling, looks freaking terrible because this is pixel art. This kind of scaling algorithm is designed for photos and nice smooth things. New values, pixelated, lets it keep the big chunky pixel look, so it looks nice when it scales up pixel art. Crisp edges has the potential to do even more advanced things. It's allowed to fall back to the same as pixelated, but it can use advanced pixel art scaling algorithms like those pioneered by a lot of game emulators and whatnot to do smoother things. I forget what exact algorithm this is an example of, but it's able to infer angles and colors and whatnot for you automatically. All right, next spec is Flexbox. Everybody has hopefully heard of Flexbox. Hopefully you're already using it. It's pretty widely available now, so you don't have much excuse unless you're still on IE6. Who knows? I'm not going to talk too much about this, just hit up the main reasons for it. Flexbox plus the next thing I'll be talking about solves basically all your layout woes. There's still a few cases I want to hit up, but this does 90% of everything. You can lay out things in any direction, left, down, up, right, with Flex Flow. You can change the order of things without messing with your markup, putting things in nice, accessible order with your content first and add second, and then just swapping them around on display. You can do vertical and horizontal alignment, including centering. If you're still making jokes about CSS centering, you are several years out of date by now. And finally, flexibility, allowing things to grow or shrink to fill the available space. Very important. There's a lot of fun examples, which I'll have a nice link to in a little while. I really wish I could do an entire talk about Flex because I love talking about that, but that's not for today. So the partner to Flex is Grid Layout. Flexbox is designed for linear layouts, anything that's one-dimensional, perhaps broken across lines because you can do a multi-line Flexbox, but it's still essentially things in order. Grid is designed for 2-dimensional layout, what is really going on for pages. Basically, all the things that you could do with table layout, Grid makes it possible to do, but ridiculously easier and not terrible markup and maintainable. Everything's great. So, quick example, here is one possible layout of a little game design thing. Title, score, stats, board, controls. Everybody can probably imagine how they might mark that up, use floats or whatnot to put it into place. But with Grid, it's literally nothing more than using a bit of ASCII art on a container to define your page markup, and then telling each piece which section of the ASCII art to go into. The title goes into block A. And here's the real magic. This is a portrait orientation, taller than it is wide. If you wanted to handle landscape as well really easily, like this layout, same stuff, just in a completely different arrangement, all you have to do is change your styles a little bit. Give a different layout. They'll all sit in the same tile. So you can just use a media query to drastically change the layout of your page, adapting to different sizes, layouts, orientations, etc., rather than the ridiculous series of hacks that we have to do today to get the same thing. If you're following along on my slides, here's a bunch of great links you should follow. Rachel Andrews' Grid by Example is a wonderful compendium of a lot of use cases, like real-world places where you might use Grid and how to do so with examples. Philip Walton's Solved by Flexbox is the same thing, but for Flexbox. And then CSS Tricks has great Grid and Flexbox guides. You can just Google for those or follow along these links on my slides. The Selectors spec, Selectors level 4, the first spec that was in level 4, but that's kind of not even a big thing today. We have a bunch of them. So I'll touch on a few of the more interesting additions. The nth child pseudoclass now does selector-based indexing. That first selector, li.foo nth child even, doesn't do what you might think. It finds list items that are .foo and that are even, not the eventh.foos. It doesn't let you count particular things, just elements themselves. So you can now move the selector into the selector part that you want to be counting on into the argument of the nth child, and this will now find all the li.foos and then only grab the even ones of them, skipping over everything else. Not implemented yet, but should show up in WebKit soon. So I think Safari will have this first. The matches function lets you do branching in CSS. I've written this kind of code all the time. Long selector, I need to change one bit to apply it as well, and I have to repeat the entire thing. Bad for maintenance, bad for reading, just not a good deal all around. Using matches, I can capture the fact that I want a TD or a TH in this case, and just put it directly in, write a single selector. Fun thing too, once this is well supported, SAS can start using this for its extend support, and finally get extends to work exactly like it's supposed to. Right now they have to do a lot of heuristics and they drop some edge cases to avoid a giant selector explosion. But matches lets them do the semantics exactly right without any explosion whatsoever. You can do extend in a single nice selector without a bunch of duplication. Variables. I've been working on variables for quite a while. They've been a request for forever in CSS. Fun thing, they work right now in Firefox. If you want to load up modern Firefox and try using variables, like this example right here, it will work. You declare a bunch of properties, custom properties, using whatever name you want. The only requirement is they have to start with 2 dashes. Give them whatever value you want, and then on any descendants of that element, you can use that property's value with the var function. In this case, I'm declaring some colors for my page, using them for the A and its visited, and then also using them on my H1. That way, if I want to change my main color at any point, I don't have to go search and replace, hope I hit everything that requires it, etc. And I have nice names on my values, and that's really important for maintainability as well. Oh, let me head back real quick. Like I said, it works today in Firefox. It works in Safari, but it's prefixed. Chrome removed our support for it that was done in WebKit because it wasn't very good. And we are currently replacing our CSS parser. As soon as we do that, we will be able to put a good implementation of variables in, so they should show up in Chrome soon-ish. I'd say in 2015, we should probably get one. The color spec. I've always been fascinated with colors. If you know me and you follow my blog, I have several posts about color stuff because math and colors are just amazing. So I've been working on the color spec recently. A few additions that have been done from author requests: 4 and 8-digit hex colors, so you can specify your alpha in your hex. You don't have to change to the RGB syntax and convert your hex back into decimal just to get a partially transparent color. And the functions in general are a little more consistent now. Alpha values accept percentages. Right now, if you specify your alpha, it's a number between 0 and 1 rather than a percentage. No idea why, just people did weird things when we first invented the color functions. The hue values also, even though it's a degree around a circle, they accept just integers right now and assume it's degrees. So the new functions will accept real angles, so you can use the turn unit or radians or whatever you want if you feel like it. There's a few new types of colors as well. HWB is a more intuitive variant of HSL, a little easier to use. You just declare your hue and then how much white and black to add to the color to get it to a different tint or whatnot. If you've used Chrome's color picker, the input type equals color, that color picker is an HWB picker. You choose your hue from the ring, and then you have a triangle with the hue, the white, and the black on each corner. And that's exactly the color space you'd be working in with HWB. The gray function lets you specify grays without repeating yourself because they have RG and B all the same. You can use a percentage or specify a 0 to 255 value just like you do today in RGB. And then the color function, which I might probably tweak the syntax of a lot, takes as much of the functionality as I can justify from SAS's color adjusting functions and bakes them into CSS. This is especially useful when you're using variables in CSS to store colors, because then you can take a few base colors and produce an entire suite of colors for your site based on making them a little bit lighter, a little darker, etc. Media queries. So one of the big problems with dealing with mobile as we've gone along is how to convert over hover-based sites and detect when you need to do an alternate solution. Media queries are trying to level up to make these kind of things easier to do. One of the most important ones here are the two queries, pointer and hover, which are showing up in Chrome now. I believe they're being implemented in Firefox. They should be around very shortly for everybody. In particular, the pointer media query has two values, coarse, which means it's a big fat pointer like your finger can't select very accurately, or fine, like a pen or a mouse pointer. And then hover is, can you hover or not, yes or no? And a few examples of the types of devices you can handle here. The great things about this is that if you handle a coarse pointer properly, just making your touch targets bigger, making sure there's enough separation between links, etc., anything with a coarse pointer, a touch device, or if you're viewing it on a Wiimote, or you're using Connect to navigate the internet, or whatever, they'll all work nicely. Breaking things down by nice features rather than by devices makes it automatically more accessible to interesting devices on the outskirts of your use cases. There are a bunch more in the spec. For example, looking for the ability to animate. You can tell if you're being viewed on an e-ink device that can't animate very well. It can change values, but it can't do constant gradations because it takes too long to update the screen, so you might scale down or drop your animations in that case. There's a bunch more in there. Luminosity queries, so you can tell if the phone is being used at night and you might want to use a different color scheme to prevent it from being all bright in your eyes. And if you have any other ideas for things that you need to know in order to design your web page appropriately, responsively, let us know. Email us on www.style@w3.org and tell us what it is you're trying to do, and maybe we can craft a media query for this. Some new things out of animation. Who here has heard of the web animation spec? Decent number, not enough. All right, everybody's homework, look up the web animation spec, just Google for it. It's taking all the functionality and ease of use of CSS animations and making them useful in JavaScript, using a syntax pretty similar to jQuery's animation if you're used to that. Gives you all the hardware acceleration, etc., that you get from using a CSS animation for certain properties, but rather than having to deal with strings and the crap that you have to do right now to try to use performant CSS animations, you just say element.animate footabar. It's very simple. Another very interesting one, again, if you're following the slides, you just click that link, is the new motion property that was recently proposed and being implemented in Chrome and Safari right now. SVG has always had a nice way to animate something around a page two-dimensionally. You can technically do that yourself just by using transform X and transform Y, but it's ridiculously difficult. It's not something that you can actually do by hand unless you're doing the simplest of things, straight lines, maybe some diagonals. If you want to do a curve around and try to set that up with easing functions on the X and Y, you can't do that with humans. Computers can do it for you, but it's terrible. Motion path just lets you specify the path you want to do using the SVG path syntax. And then you just tell the element, I want you to be at this position and animate over to this position, and it will follow the path for you automatically. And finally, we come to the real future of CSS. What I've talked about before are features that are coming up in the near future or the medium future, things that we're giving you. Polyfilling CSS is where CSS will end up with you giving things to us. No language can grow forever. CSS is already an enormous language. We have over 400 properties, and memorizing everything is ridiculously difficult, and we're only getting larger. Every day we add something new. The cycle time between us finding a need and us creating a spec, and then it being implemented, and then it being usefully implemented across enough devices for you to use on sites is too long. Flexbox's cycle time was about 5 years, and that's not atypical. It's pretty normal there. And that's ridiculous. We can't deal with a 5-year cycle time between, I have an idea, I can use the idea on a website. So there's a lot of places where we can open up CSS to polyfilling, to JavaScript-based approaches that still hook into low-level browser primitives, the things that CSS is affecting in the first place, but let you tailor things to your own solution. One simple example, probably one of the first that will show up, is polyfilling media queries. We're going to start with a... wrong thing. Starting with a... See if I can... Oh, I can't get that. All right, cool. Small screen, too small for me. Creating custom media queries, just to give names, this is more or less variables for media queries. If you'll notice as well, I'm using a nice fun syntax, 500 pixels less than or equal to width, etc. That's a new syntax in media queries because we never really wanted to do min width and max width. It's a little bit confusing. We always wanted nice relational operators like you're used to in normal programming. But 10, 15 years ago when this was first invented, XML was harder to work with. Nowadays we don't care. We can use less than and greater than signs pretty freely. So that's fine. So this just gives a name to a longer media query. You can make one that's just for small screen, for example, that has that, maybe some other media query stacked on. Give it a nice short name. Use that throughout your document, again, so you don't repeat yourself. Also, the script-based syntax for this lets you do more advanced things. You want to, how many people use Modernizer? So, Modernizer works by setting classes on the body. This means, though, that you have to use a relatively inefficient selector to style off of this, doing body.animation or whatever it does, and then a descendant selector. Relatively slow. Instead, that kind of thing could be set up as media queries, which don't require searching over the document for it. Set up true or false, set up new values for what you want. If you're using some new API on the web, on some mobile device that isn't exposed into CSS yet, but you want to style your page based on that, you can set up a custom media query for that with whatever values you want, and you can just use them in your page like any other media query would. There's a bunch more that we could do here too. There's a basic list here. The most important one, though, is down at number 5, custom layout. That's one of the things that has the longest cycle time right now. I said Flexbox has been a 5-year cycle time from me starting to work on it to it being usable across everywhere. And that's only because I started from a spec that already kind of existed. Everybody already recognized it was useful. Grid has a similar cycle time. A lot of ideas are smaller than this, but layout just takes a long time. It's extremely complicated to get right when you're trying to design forever. So recently, I was in Sydney for a week with the Chrome team down there, and we spent the entire week talking about how we could make layout customizable. Very difficult because it's very perf sensitive. It's very easy to slow down the entire page if you don't do things carefully. We think we have some solutions for this, and we're getting together with other browser vendors. Our next meeting in February will be with Firefox, IE, and Safari to talk about exactly how we want to design a custom layout system that lets JavaScript create layouts that respond well to CSS. Because, of course, you can create layouts yourself right now. You have JavaScript drive some absolute positioning, etc. But you're stuck with the container being usually fixed size. Because CSS, when it asks, hey, what size are you, you can't respond well. You have to just give a definite answer. This kind of thing will make custom layouts work well within CSS and make it much easier to say, I want something like Flexbox, but a little bit different details. Just go write it yourself, or get someone else to write it for you. And then if it's a really good idea afterwards, we can come along, pick it up, look really smart because we're designing something great. But you don't have to wait for us to do it first. There's no more asking permission. And that's the big ideal here. Just letting y'all, all of y'all in this room and outside, work on the web in CSS the same way you do with JavaScript, the same way you do with preprocessors, etc., and continue on from there. So that's the end. I think it's probably time. If we do have any time, I can take questions, but I don't know if this is a question-y type place. All right, cool. No questions. Talk to me later. Thank you very much.